Hi, my name's Carl Morris. I'm the principal of Carfax College and the head of private tutors for the Carfax Education Group. I think all parents over the last few weeks have had a bit of a crash course in distance learning. And as a result of this, we've seen a lot more inquiries about our homeschooling programs. And we thought that we put this webinar together to address some of the concerns that people often have, to look through a few case studies of some of the students that we've previously worked with, and answer any of your questions at the end. With us today, we've got Fiona McKenzie, who's Head of Education for the Carfax Education Group. We have Claire Preston, who's Director of Studies for Carfax Education UAE, and James Alexander, who is Head of Operations for Carfax Education UAE. To start with, let's go through what homeschooling is. We have always preferred the term personalised learning when we talk to families about homeschooling. That acknowledges the fact that many of our students come to us with specific needs, with academic goals in mind, and also that not all homeschooling takes place in the home. We have our own centre in various countries, and many families opt to come to us for their personalised learning programmes. Homeschooling does tend to follow an established curriculum, so that could be the British curriculum, it might be a K-12 curriculum, or some other internationally recognised curriculum. But that's not to say that we're bound by that curriculum. One of the huge benefits of homeschooling is the personalisation of each and every programme. The goal is to encourage curiosity in all of our students, and part of the beauty of a homeschooling programme is being able to develop and nurture that curiosity through the interests that a student might have, and then encouraging them to ask questions that might be off syllabus. So although we do follow those curriculums, we do tend to lean outside of them occasionally as well. One big question that we often get asked, especially in the UAE, is homeschooling legal? And the short answer to that is yes, it is. In a number of countries, including the UK and the UAE. The UAE does have a requirement of something called a transfer certificate if you want to re-enroll into a school. And Carfax is in a unique position to be able to provide that, as we do actually have an independent school in the UK, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The point here is that a lot of parents come to us and ask, are the qualifications the same that they receive at the end? And yes, they are. A large part of our homeschooling cohort follow the British curriculum, and the qualifications that you gain through the British curriculum are GCSEs and A-levels, and you gain those exact same GCSEs and A-levels as part of a homeschooling program. So here I've got some statistics on homeschooling and why parents choose homeschooling. These are all based in the UK. And as you can see from the chart on the left, homeschooling has been increasing quite significantly over the past few years. The previous 2 academic years are missing from this bar chart here, but they're estimated to be around 60,000 students, up to 80,000 students in this previous year. So we can see a huge increase, and we're anticipating that this increase will be even more so after this period of distance learning that's occurred due to the current kind of situation. The number one reason for parents choosing to home educate, and it is almost overwhelmingly so, was dissatisfaction with the school. Now, when you delve a little bit deeper into this study, it's not necessarily dissatisfaction with just the academics. It can be a broad range of reasons, but the majority seem to think that the progress that was made in schools was too slow compared to the amount of time that was spent there, and that seemed to be the reason that people chose homeschooling. And on the right, we can see a breakdown of the typical age ranges that, or the typical stages of education that people choose homeschooling. It's normally Key Stage 3, which is Year 7 to Year 9 in the British curriculum, and Key Stage 4, which is the Year 10 and Year 11, the GCSE year. So who is homeschooling for? Now, a lot of people ask this question, what's the typical profile of someone who comes to us for homeschooling? And I would honestly say there isn't a typical profile. There are a few key reasons that people tend to come for homeschooling, but we get people from all sorts of different backgrounds, from all sorts of academic abilities. So there is no kind of standard for who homeschooling is right for. What we do find is that homeschooling suits people who are usually in the kind of on the edges rather than the middle kind of academic ability. So people who are looking to be extended beyond the curriculum and feel like school is going a little bit too slowly for them. People who might choose to take courses that are not included in their school might come to us just for that one course. People who are just looking for not to be taught for the test, to understand the subject and see how it fits into the kind of bigger picture of all the other subjects. But then on the other extreme, we see people who require additional support. Now that could be people who have suffered a medical condition and fallen behind in school. It could be people who just feel like school is not for them, the pace is just going a little bit too fast for them, but they can't learn in that sort of group environment. And then there's people who just need extra flexibility. So families who travel a lot and move around a lot prefer that homeschooling option because it just gives them the flexibility to move as they wish, because we're not bound then by the term dates. We can tailor that to your kind of specific schedule. And I'm going to bring in Claire here and just say, is there anything else that you would add to this, or have we covered?
No, I think you've covered a lot. I mean, other than that, I could think of maybe people that are a bit school phobic and they just don't enjoy that group environment and they need a little bit of extra support. But I think you've covered most of it.
Okay, great.
Can I just chip in with, I know certainly that we've worked with a couple of students who are elite sports performers too, and that's always an interesting one. And that can be whether perhaps you're a musician or a dancer or something that takes you out of your school environment for significant periods of time. A homeschooling program can adapt really well to work around that kind of other commitment.
Yeah, that's great. And we've worked with a few in the past. Yeah, that's great. So when we meet families who are considering homeschooling, we often hear the same kind of concerns. And despite homeschooling increasing in popularity, there is still a bit of a stigma around it, especially on certain topics. So I thought we would walk through a few of the key concerns that people raise and try to explain how that works in homeschooling. So possibly the most common question from a parent is, how does homeschooling affect my students' social development? Now, there have actually been a number of studies on this across the world. And there was a recent study in Canada that took students who had been homeschooled 15 years ago and looked at how they had developed as adults, and compared them with a group of a similar size that had been schooled traditionally. Now, what we saw was that the group that had been homeschooled tended to be more, have a more active lifestyle, to be engaged in more activities, social activities. They tended to have a kind of higher degree of education. They had more of them did postgraduate degrees, and they also reported a higher life satisfaction. So I think one of the concerns that comes up is, how will this affect my students' social development, and how are they going to progress into adults? And I think we can see from studies that it doesn't kind of hamper that progress. Claire, what do you think about this, about how we try to engage students socially?
Well, because we have that very close relationship with the students and the families, we're able to work in collaboration with the families to target anything that that student needs to work on in terms of social development. And then we can pinpoint the activities and extracurriculars that are going to help with that. So it could be improv or theatre or public speaking. And then what's nice is that this can be incorporated into the lessons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's an important factor, always incorporating the interest and looking at the students' development as a whole. Is there anything else you would add here, James or Fiona?
I think that, no, I mean, there are so many wonderful activities you can do outside of school. And it gives you more time in a sense, because you don't then have to just do everything in that sort of after school period. You can actually do it throughout the day. So it gives children, I think, an opportunity to really extend themselves in different areas that wouldn't be available to them in school. So I know we've had one student, for example, who's been doing improv classes, and that's had an amazing impact on his confidence level, his presentation skills. It's probably not the sort of thing he might have got involved in had he been in a traditional school environment. So I think there are lots of opportunities. I think it's about being creative. I think we also find, I think you'd all agree with me, that some of our families really like the quite protected environment of a kind of homeschooling option. And maybe they have a very extended family network or a very extended community network. Or sort of faith network, and actually the children derive a huge amount of kind of social interaction from that. So they're not necessarily requiring it from a school environment in the same way.
Yeah, and I think also because it is one-on-one, we can push the students to their own, outside of their own comfort zones at their pace, a pace that suits them, where it's not overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also a tendency in schools to socialize within that one school. And I think that almost by taking out that and looking at all the extracurricular activities that wherever you might be located has to offer, you might even broaden the social opportunities of a student rather than narrow them.
I think that's really true. I remember last year we had a student who was passionate about basketball, and he joined a local basketball team. So rather than just socializing with his kind of school kind of group in a basketball team, he was able to access people from all over Dubai, and he was quite new to the region. So it helped him sort of make friends very quickly across a broad network.
Yeah. And just to build on the point you said earlier, Fiona, where you were talking about the improv classes, and that's something that a school would not necessarily offer. And having that extra time that would normally be taken up by your normal school day to be able to go and explore and do these extracurriculars that really tailor more towards your interest rather than relying on what schools themselves actually offer.
And I think it allows you to develop them kind of more fully. We had one student who was very good at art. She was able to take extended art classes in the mornings on a one-to-one basis for 3 or 4 hours at a time, so she could really kind of develop her skill set, and then did her academic subjects in the time after that. So I think it's the flexibility really, but I think it's absolutely critical to remember that the social development is a crucial part of any child's education. But I think there's just multiple ways of achieving that. It doesn't have to be achieved in a sort of school environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably also important to note here as well that actually many of our students have, and even the parents have reported a kind of better family life, that some families actually come to us with the kind of specific goal in mind to give the children their childhood back, because we can cover things at a faster pace. And I think, there's that aspect of it too, the interaction with your family.
That's so true, Carl. I remember you and I have had several conversations in the last year with families who've got younger children who are really quite sort of sad and disillusioned by the fact that their children are in school from 7:30 in the morning until kind of 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's all just quite a sort of mechanical sort of factory life, and they come home and they're exhausted and they don't have time to kind of play. And obviously with a homeschooling program you can condense that learning into a short space of time, because as you say, you can move at the child's pace, but then gives you that extended period of time to do other things with them, to walk on the beach, or to take them to do activities that you choose for them. So I think it's an opportunity to rebalance a child's life, particularly at that early stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we probably all agree that that homeschooling doesn't necessarily mean a poor social development in the child. So the next kind of thing we get asked a lot is regarding grades. So obviously, a lot of families come to us with the hope of boosting their students' grades, and they want to be reassured that homeschooling is at least in line with kind of traditional schooling. And it's interesting to note that there are some studies that show, when compared with traditional schoolers, that homeschoolers do often report higher scores on standardized tests. And I think that the statistic that I read was that on average it's 37 percentile points higher on a standardized test compared to the public school average. And I think this is largely due to the difference in approach to learning. I mean, I've always said that a tutor is not a teacher. They're very different skill sets, and they're very different approaches to education. And I think, well, I'll bring James in here as probably the most recent tutor here. You can tell us a little bit about how homeschooling actually takes action from the tutor's side.
Sure, yeah. So homeschooling is definitely leaps and bounds above school in terms of the personal aspect. So a lot of our tutors will teach these students one-on-one for a significant amount of time, to the point where they get to know them incredibly well, their likes, their dislikes, what they have fun doing. And that really, really helps to tailor these lessons to the students, to know when they're feeling exhausted, to know their limits, to know what time of day they feel best to do specific lessons at. And that kind of personal aspect is exactly what homeschooling is about, and why it has such a massive advantage, even in terms of grades, over general schooling. Being able to get to know the students so well and be able to tailor any curriculum or spec that the students are following to them like that has unbelievable advantages. Just in terms of purely time investment, time management, we can pull 2-year courses just down to 1 year, just through the efficiency of the homeschooling process and being able to not waste any time through their education. Some students have pulled forward GCSEs, some pull forward A-levels, some put A-levels into 1 year, and that's purely because of the efficiency of this system, because we get to know the students incredibly well, and we're able to tailor everything around them in a very, very efficient way.
I think, I mean, I obviously haven't been involved in the teaching, but I do see the students coming out of some of these lessons, and the word I would kind of use is engaged. These kids come out and they are just really engaged in the process of learning. I think sometimes sitting in a classroom, students can kind of zone out a bit, but you can't do that if you're doing one-to-one. And if you've got somebody kind of lovely and smiley who's really passionate about their subject and who knows your child really well, they can constantly kind of keep that curiosity alive and do that kind of encouragement. So the kind of attention span sort of extends, if you like, in that kind of one-to-one environment.
And many of our tutors are also teach many different subjects. So, for example, my speciality would be the sciences and maths, and being able to integrate all of these subjects together, along with things like psychology, robotics, programming, and being able to sort of dip your toe into different things is fantastic for the students, because they can just see how everything interconnects. And that's one thing I think the normal schooling system lacks a little bit, is showing that everything can fuse with all the other subjects, and like different things can have different groupings of topics, and being able to have teachers who are able to see those connections is really, really helpful moving forward for things like university choices or career choices later down the line.
I think that's really true. I think one of the criticisms that's sometimes levelled at the British education system is a little bit linear. But actually, as you described, James, you can teach it in a very interdisciplinary way. And that's such a valuable skill set to have in life going forward, where more and more we see the kind of creative and the technical merging together.
And I think
alongside, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, I think as well as being efficient, once you access the learning, you access the child's interest and passion, and you can take it off the curriculum as well, and you can delve in deeper to those subjects that are not on tests, but the child would like to know about, and we're able to do that.
It's definitely, it's a mix of efficiency alongside enjoyability. Like being able to allow the students to not only get through content quickly and have them understand it, but also to have an aspect where the student actually enjoys learning about these subjects is something that normal schooling really struggles to provide. But with the homeschooling process, that's our aim and our primary goal.
I think that's really true. I think what you're saying, James, about the consolidation, which is such a key part of learning. It's just constantly making sure that information is consolidated, and you can do that over a period of time and on a repeated basis in a one-to-one environment. Whereas in a kind of class of 25 children, you're never quite sure who's remembered what. So suddenly when you listen to all of this, it's like not surprising that they're 37% points higher on standardized tests, because actually they're learning in such a kind of unique and intensive way, but also learning in their own learning style, which I think gives them an incredible advantage.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've always said that tutors are not quite the same as teachers. And I think that's because the way I see teaching in a classroom is that the students are following the teacher. But tutoring is almost like the student is the one paving the way. The teacher is just there to keep them on track in the bounds of what they need and guide. And it's a bit more like mentoring at that stage, I think. I think a good tutor will always keep a student in that kind of perfect middle ground between not so, the student isn't so far ahead that they're bored, but they're not so far behind that they're lost. So we're keeping them always learning. And I think that is what encourages the engagement and interest in a lot of these subjects. And that's why you see people interested coming out of the lessons. And then the last question that we often get asked is about higher education and access to higher education. So I think I'll let Fiona here talk about this one a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, I think lots of families are concerned that the kind of qualifications they might be taking in a homeschooling environment or a personalised learning environment won't prepare them well for university. But in fact, I would argue in a sense it's almost the opposite, because the students are being taught or are learning to learn very independently. You know, they're undertaking their own research, they're very good at time management, and you know, the personalized learning ignites that curiosity, which is absolutely critical for a higher education student. So we find that the students are very well equipped to deal with a university program, and I've got 3 homeschoolers this year who have all applied to university and have all been offered places at top universities. So we've got one going onto UCL to study business management. We've got another one who has got onto the PwC Flying Start program, which is highly competitive and is a finance and accountancy program. So there's absolutely no barriers to entering university from a homeschooling background, and in fact, as I say, I think it equips you with a really valuable skill set to succeed there. Also, part of what we do with our kind of homeschoolers is to provide them with that one-to-one support as they make their applications. So because we've got to know them really well, we understand sort of where they're going, what they want to get out of the next stage of their education. So we're able to be kind of quite intimately involved in that, and to ensure that they choose the right courses at the right universities, and then we can really support them to make successful applications, which is you know what we've seen this year, which is hugely satisfying for them, but also really great for, you know, we're really thrilled for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have we try to have a whole view of each student, and we're really invested in the whole process. So getting them to achieve what they want to achieve and what they're capable of.
Yeah, I think it's a very holistic process, isn't it? And that in a sense is the beauty of that personalized learning environment, that we're all engaged in it, and all you know, it's we were talking to a family the other day, and we were saying it's like being team whatever the child is, you know, it's Team Fiona. We're all in there behind that child, rooting for them and wanting, you know, to make sure that they achieve their full potential.
Yeah, absolutely. So
any questions at that stage from our audience?
Not as far as I can tell. A lot of the things that have kind of come up have been very quickly answered by your debunking myths. They were very much the myths that everyone had. Things such as, you know, what is in the subjects. I know that you guys touched on how there's quite a wide variety of subjects you guys can teach because it's so personalized. And I think people are concerned that, you know, you're just having the school environment in a homeschooling setting. Whereas, as you guys were saying, it's very much more that we can personalize the learning around the children and make sure that each student has, you know, subjects that interest them, ones that push them, and things like that. And other than that, people were kind of just asking about standardized tests and if, you know, how do you decide if they're doing IGCSE or GCSE, and how do you kind of decide how the qualifications work in homeschooling?
Okay, so the question around how do we choose what qualifications they would take, I think that would always be a conversation that we'd have with the tutors, with the students, and with the kind of academic team within Carfax. There are differences between the GCSEs and their IGCSEs equivalent, and the factors that might go into deciding which is which would be, where you actually want to sit the test, whether you sit that with a partner school or whether you sit that in the British Council, and also some of the slight differences in exam board. So for example, there are some differences between the maths IGCSEs and the GCSEs, and some of them are significant enough that perhaps a weaker student would be better suited to one than another. A strong student we might push down a different path. So that's really something we would have a conversation about to decide what is the best qualification for the student, what is the best chance of achieving the potential.
I think also, just bearing in mind, there are some curriculums, aren't there, Carl, that are better suited to homeschooling environments. So the kind of science curriculum and things like that. Obviously, whilst it's possible in some environments to do practical work, there are curriculums specifically designed where that's not a major feature.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be a big factor. Yeah, so we'd want to remove the practical element of some, and others. There's a coursework element which students entered as private candidates are not capable of entering coursework. There is a way that we could work with our college in Oxford to do that, but traditionally it's just an added complication that we usually avoid.
Awesome. I think that's all for questions at the moment.
I was just going to pick up on the question about the kind of variety of subjects, because I think that's been one of the things that's really fascinated me about seeing how this works with the kind of Carfax team. Claire, you've got some experience with I think you and James have taught students kind of subjects that would not be part of their curriculum at that sort of stage.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we're doing 3D design, psychology with students that wouldn't be able to access that in mainstream school for their ages, but we're able to cater it to their level, and they have a real interest in it. And actually, for one of the students that does psychology, we're thinking of entering him early for a GCSE because he's just enjoyed it so much and has really been quite good at it. We do computer science, robotics. We can offer languages like Mandarin, French, Spanish, German. Most of our homeschoolers are trilingual. And lots of things, music, all sorts.
Okay, awesome. I think that's everything for questions. I'll leave you guys to the rest of the slideshow.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. So here, the benefits of homeschooling, we've talked through a lot of these points here already. It is worth noting that some of the students, as part of the surveys that I mentioned earlier, the studies earlier, they reported that some of their opinions on the benefits of homeschooling were increased time with the family, an opportunity for extensive curricular enrichment, flexibility in terms of the schedule, the individualized pace of programs, and the development of their own independence and confidence, as well as all the other factors that we've mentioned that go towards that kind of superior education that's received as part of one-to-one tuition. Another part of this that is probably worth mentioning at this point is that it isn't just left to tutors. I think that's one thing that families often think is the case with homeschooling. There is a whole academic team behind the student. The tutor is delivering the lessons, but the tutor has the support of all the team, and the student has the support of the whole team as well. And we're all, as Fiona said earlier, rooting for that student and trying to give them the best education they possibly can have.
Can I just add a kind of note here about teenagers? I think we will all acknowledge, and there's a lot of scientific research to say that actually the teenager's body clock is really quite out of kilter with a school day. And I think that's one of the things I've really noticed. I know this year we've had several GCSE kind of aged children, and when we've started their lessons at 10 or at 11, which has worked much better for them with their body clocks, and they're much more alert, they're much more ready to learn. We're not dragging them out of bed at sort of 7:30 and they're turning up for first lesson looking a bit kind of groggy-eyed. So I think that's been a really interesting kind of side effect, that you can work with a child's body clock, and then that can really help to sort of maximize their kind of engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be different from every student as well. So just working with their schedules is definitely a huge plus. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at some case studies now based on a few students that we have worked with in homeschooling recently, who've all kind of had slightly different requirements, and we've put together slightly different programs for. So the first student we have was an A-level student. And it isn't uncommon for us to have be approached by a family or a student looking to boost their grades. But this particular student had already completed their A-levels, but hadn't performed as expected due to a medical condition. And they felt that it would have limited the university choices. So what we did with that student was we brought them in to resit some of the A-levels that they had previously taken, but also to fast track a new A-level in business studies, which opened the door a little bit to some more university choices, and it allowed this student who was actually a very studious and quite a capable student to make sure that she got to a top university like she wanted to. I think, Fiona, you worked with her on those new places. So.
Yes, and I think it was quite interesting, Carl, because when you and I first met the family, they were very despondent and very kind of upset about the kind of A-level results, and as you say, kind of the limitations that was going to place on her going forward. And interestingly enough, during the year that she had been taking the A-levels, her kind of ambitions had changed. She'd originally wanted to do medicine, and by the end of her A-levels, she knew that wasn't the direction that she wanted to take anymore. But she was sort of saddled, in a sense, with the 3 A-levels that were gearing her to that. So when they came to see us and we said, well, look, why would you retake those 3 A-levels? You don't have to do that. Why don't you retake your best 2 and then add in the business studies, and that would then be able to take you in a completely different direction. And they had no idea that that was even possible. So that was a really sort of exciting sort of gear change for them. And the students absolutely embraced it. I mean, she worked really hard and she was a very motivated student, but to do business studies in a year is not for the faint-hearted, but she loved the subject. She was really good at it, and in fact she's the one who's now going to go on and study finance and accounting. So it really was a complete sort of change of direction for her. And she was able to do that in sort of 3 hours a day of kind of contact time, and a lot of hard work behind the scenes. And also we were able to adapt her timetable almost on a kind of weekly, monthly basis, because some weeks she would say, actually I want to have a week off, I want to go on holiday with my family, or if everybody else is off, she's all right, everybody they're all busy, I'd like to do some more this week. So we could be really flexible about how we manage the program for her. And touch wood, she'll get the results. Well, we've obviously had to go through the kind of assessment of grades process, but she should get the results that she deserves and carry on to a really successful university place and a great career.
Yeah, great. And I think because she was such a good student and she worked so hard, she was quite independent. We tried a slightly different approach with her, with this kind of flipped learning approach, where she was guided by our tutors to read ahead in the subject, and to bring that knowledge to the next lesson, so that the tutor could then consolidate the learning and focus on really the weak areas in a subject, just to maximize that time. And I think that's why she got to have, she actually had fairly limited contact time, considering that she was doing 2 years into one. And that's a type of approach we can use with students if it's kind of appropriate. Is there anything else?
Those are skills that will be really valuable for her at university, because that's much more of a sort of independent learning style. So that's going to stand her in very good stead. And she thrived in that sort of environment.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say that was one of the things that actually really kept her engaged. I think she actually enjoyed that style of learning.
Mm.
Okay, so our next student is a Key Stage 3 student. This student is in year 8, and the family came to us really with this kind of goal of igniting his curiosity and his interest in learning, and moving beyond the curriculum, and trying to teach these subjects in kind of an innovative way that catered specifically to his interests. And I mean, James actually been involved and taught this student. What did you think of the approach here?
So yeah, this student, he was, like you said, he was particularly interested in moving outside the curriculum. He found that the curriculum at school was very trapping, that he was quite bored with the day-to-day, well, I was going to say robotic, but the day-to-day of the school just being a bit too linear. And like you say, being able to push that and do other subjects that he says, I want to try this, I want to try that, and to dip his toe into different subjects is something that the schools just can't offer. And so him having the time and the resources to be able to do these kind of things is fantastic. So for my end, he wanted to try psychology. He was interested in the different aspects of psychology, experimentation, that kind of thing. And we were able to teach him to the stage now where it looks like he's going to be pulled forward for an early GCSE in the subject, which is something that his school would not have ever been able to offer him. And he ended up having a real talent for it and being able to absorb all the information because it was a subject he found really interesting. And so like a sponge, all the information just went right inside him, and he held on to it in an amazing way that I didn't really see with any of his other subjects. So just having that and being able to pull a GCSE forward is absolutely fantastic.
Didn't you also get him to do a questionnaire? Because he's quite a shy child, isn't he? And you kind of really use the subject to kind of bring him out of his shell.
Oh, absolutely. So even with him as well, he did some of the public speaking practice and learning. So being able to sort of work on those weaknesses in a way that he was able to improve himself in an enjoyable manner. Whereas I can imagine in school, if that kind of thing came up, he would never in a million years have put himself forward for it. But because the tutors have that very personal relationship with him and get along with him so well, he wasn't afraid to come out of his shell in that regard and really show off that he is actually capable of these things, which those talents wouldn't have been able to shine in a school setting.
And I think, I mean, Claire, you'd organised some field trips with Ray, I think, as well in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever something has come up in a lesson that he's had a real interest in, or maybe it's come up in the lesson and he hasn't quite grasped the concept, we look into different trips that he can go on, where he can go in and have a deeper look at the material. And he's always really enjoyed those. Like we've done science fairs and going to Animal Planet and lots of different things.
Yeah. It's so great to be able to supplement the learning like that, I think, isn't it? Kind of on a very flexible basis. You're like, oh, we're doing this week. He's loving this. Let's go and do this.
Yeah. Walking around the astrophysics museum with an astrophysicist.
Amazing.
And I think that's part of the programs as well, is being able to, adapt the program as it goes along, as we find new information, as new events might pop up throughout the year, we can adapt to that and make sure we include that in a kind of constructive way. Another interesting thing about this program was that we did it in partnership with the Carfax College in the UK. So that the plan for the student was spend the first 2 terms in the UAE, and the final term in the UK, where the tutors in both the UAE and the UK would work in conjunction with each other to keep the continuity, but it allowed the student to travel. I think the goal was to travel away from the UAE during the summer months when it gets quite hot, and also Oxford is a fantastic place to be, especially for education. So just to inspire him a little bit as he started progressing through his education. And then the last student that we're going to look through today was someone that we built an early years program for. And I mentioned earlier that the parents have approached us in the past to give the children their childhood back. And this was really one of those cases where, I mean, there's a lot of controversy over the age range that we send children to school, and it's different in every country. And some people do feel like it's too soon. And I think we had a student here who is at Key Stage 1 age, who felt like they were spending all of their childhood stuck in school. I think the family wanted to spend more time with their child, and that was one of the things that a homeschooling program allowed, because as we are covering things at the pace of the child, usually we can get through content a little bit faster, so we can condense our programs to not quite take up as much time as a typical school day. Now, I know, Claire, you've worked with a student in the past. Is there anything you would add to this?
Yep, so we have a few early years homeschoolers, but one in particular is a very bright child, and his family, like you said, wanted to encourage his natural curiosity and love of learning, and they've, in collaboration with the family, they've done projects like incubating an egg to hatch a chick, and then the child was so interested by this chick that it was translated into the other subjects, like writing diaries of a day in the life of a chick and measuring the chick, weighing the chick, all sorts of things like that. And what's nice is that they can pick a theme for that week and it goes through the subjects. And also for the younger years, we can do shorter lessons to make sure that they're always engaged. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have a child that wasn't working very well in a group setting in mainstream school and needed that one-on-one attention to slow it down and focus on the basics before he could progress through his education. So we were able to do that as well.
I think there was some lovely feedback from that family, wasn't there, about how the child had really benefited from the kind of structure of a one-to-one interaction, and actually his behavior had kind of calmed, and he was much more sort of engaged in sort of a happier child overall, not having to sort of face the daily battle of a kind of group environment. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
I just want to pick on the word you use, sorry, Carl, the word you use there, Claire, about collaboration. I think that's one of the things that comes out of this very strongly, is the collaborative approach that you can take with the family. And I think one of the things that families have enjoyed, some families have really enjoyed about the current situation, is being more engaged in their child's education and having more idea about what they're doing. And that's certainly something in a homeschooling program or a bespoke, personalized learning program, where the family can be much more engaged in that alongside the tutors and the kind of curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just going to touch on that. I mean, what you said earlier about students can, as you say, if they feel like they're not making the progress that they want to make in school, that could be quite a stressful situation. I think what we've often found is that when people do come to us who've had that experience, that change in approach of being able to go at the student's pace has helped them with their just general happiness in general, because it's just a less stress on them to know that they're not going to walk into a classroom and be completely lost. I think the tutors are always quite nimble and agile in the way that they teach, and they can move around a subject. So if you're not getting something, you can delve deeper into that. You can go into the fundamentals again, which if you were in a classroom setting, you either might be too scared to ask, or it just might not be appropriate for the teacher to move the lesson just for a single student. So here I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the homeschooling programs that we provide. All of our programs are bespoke, so we do have a consultation with every family. We discuss the needs, the academic goals, the learning style, everything, in order to develop a program. But really it falls into two big brackets, where one would be the full-time program, where you would have a significant amount of contact time in a week, up to 25 hours. And well, as part of that, we would aim to to free up the time after school, so there wouldn't be a large amount of homework in this program unless required for consolidation of learning or moving ahead. But this kind of level of contact time allows kind of freedom after school to take part in extracurriculars. The other side of that might be if you have a particularly independent learner, we could provide the materials and resources for that student to work independently, and we would assign a mentor to touch base with that student on a weekly basis to make sure that they were on track and they were making progress. We would still assign end of topic assignments and tests so that we can maintain a record of how that student is progressing, and raise any concerns as they come up. You will always have the option in that of adding tuition as required on a kind of ad hoc basis. And then kind of in between those two, there's the part-time programs that are tailored specifically to meet a student's needs. So if a student's taking less subjects or more subjects, we might move the number of hours around in terms of contact time.
I think it's important to mention here too, Carl, isn't it, that, you know, if you're studying for GCSEs or for A levels, there are a recommended number of hours that should be allocated to that study. So whether it falls within the full-time program or the independent program, you know, there's a certain key number of hours that you need to devote to studying that program one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does present challenges when trying to condense a 2-year course into a 1-year course. It doesn't make it impossible, but it is something we have to seriously consider when planning that course for the year and the number of subjects that student's planning to take in that year. Yeah. Is there anything else anyone would add here? No? Okay. Then that brings us to the end. I've mentioned throughout this webinar a few statistics and articles related to homeschooling. There are a number of these online that go into the long-term effects of homeschooled education on students, and I'm pleased to say that they're almost all positive. So do go out and research it. But these were the 3 that I'd mentioned throughout this webinar. I think now, if there are any questions from anyone, we could take some questions now.
Yeah, sure. While we're just talking through these first couple, if anyone does have any questions, do feel free to just pop them in the chat and we'll answer those for you. So one of the things that people have been asking on our Instagram is, would it be recommended to do homeschooling in your centre or at my own home?
I think that depends on student to student. I think we always encourage students to come into the centre. And that's largely just due to we have lots of resources available in the centre. We have a bit more control over that environment, and it can just create quite a good learning environment for students. Also, breaking up the day and not associating school with the home is quite a beneficial thing too.
But it really, as you say, Carl, it really depends on the family, doesn't it? Because some people want to sort of learn in their own home, and we've certainly got families who have equipped sort of, you know, classrooms really for their child to learn. And certainly for those who do want to learn at home, we can go in and do a sort of assessment of home environment and then recommend certain things that might be helpful and resources that would support the child's learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do currently work with a number of students who do get homeschooled in the home, and it works very, very well. So we just look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Someone else is asking about what age range you think benefits homeschooling the most.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I would say, as with an educational background, I would say it really depends on the child. I think, you know, certain students, like our early years children, for them it's working beautifully at the moment, but it wouldn't be right for every child at that stage. And some of these children may then opt to go back into full-time school at a later stage. I think for others, particularly if it's hitting kind of exam crunch time, and they don't feel they're making the progress they feel they're capable of, then that can also be another opportunity to kind of step out and focus on that for a period of time. We've certainly all worked with students who've done sort of GCSEs in a home learning environment and then gone back in and done A-levels or IB in a school environment. So I think it really depends on the child, depends on the kind of family situation as well. I'm sure you've all got other things to add.
Yeah, I think that as you say, it just depends on the child and the family situation. I think that we commonly get people come to us who are in their exam years, GCSE or A-levels, but what we're seeing more and more is those younger years coming to us as well, and we do see that it works really quite well for students. You are right, it doesn't work for everyone. But with enough kind of input and looking into that student's kind of learning style and their abilities and what their goals are, I think all of our homeschoolers that have been with us have been happy with the program that they have received.
Okay. Someone else is asking how the science subjects will work with experiments. Often in centres there isn't always a lab. So how do you kind of build that into the timetables?
You're right that there isn't a lab, and a lot of there is a practical element to almost all the science exams. As we mentioned earlier, some of the GCSEs don't have they have a practical paper instead of a practical component, but it is still very useful to have gone through some of the practicals, or at least some of the ideas of the techniques behind them. And I think we've come up with some quite creative ways to actually have experiments within our centre. And I think James would probably be a good person to tell us about some of the things he's worked on.
Yeah, so I sort of, within my lessons, I sort of pride myself on being able to do these experiments not in a school setting. So we have plenty of resources and equipment in our centre to be able to recreate almost identical experiments that you'd be able to see in schools. And the only differences would be that we don't have like sort of the gas for things like chemistry experiments, but even those kind of things can be recreated in our centres. It's actually quite surprising the amount of actual things you don't need the full lab setup for. The large majority can just be done and taught on a more one-to-one basis. So with large regard to safety and everything. But the students get much more hands-on, and they can ask more questions, etc. So actually, rather looking at it from a flipped view, they get a more in-depth side of the practicals than they would in schools, because they get to have that one-on-one time with the teacher the entire time.
Awesome. Someone else is just asking generally about if there is always a timetable in place for homeschooling.
Well, yes, we do encourage a timetable, just so that there is some regularity in the course, but we are flexible with it. So Claire deals a lot with our timetable at the moment, and I think you will probably agree that we've moved things around a lot for families as they require it.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think at the start we talk about which subjects the child would like to take, what their interests are, how many hours they'd like to dedicate to that. And then as it goes through the term, we can reassess constantly to up hours in certain subjects if they need it, or introduce new subjects if they're particularly interested in them. But then we can work the schedule around the times that suit them as well. So if they have an extracurricular at 2 and they need to be out of the centre by 1:30, that's fine.
I think what you're saying about there being a structure is really important. I think all children respond to that kind of sense of routine and structure. So it is important to have a sort of timetable in place. And just from a practical point of view, you need to know that the tutors are available for particular kind of slots. So there is always a sort of timetable framework, but as Claire says, it can be adapted as you go along.
People are also asking, in terms of, I know we discussed a little bit about when to start homeschooling, but when would you actually say is the best time to start homeschooling if you're going to continue, throughout most of your education homeschooled?
I think that's a really good question, because as the question points out, and as Carl alluded to earlier on, you know, in different parts of the world, children start school at different ages. So it really does depend on the child. And one of the things that we would do before we sort of take on a homeschooling child is to do an assessment of that child, and to work out sort of where they are academically and where they are developmentally, so that you can assess whether they would be a good fit for a homeschooling program, and also whether they're going to kind of derive the maximum benefit out of it. So we're quite careful about who we would recommend this program for. Wouldn't you say, Claire and Carl?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, assessing the student and getting to know them a little bit before we make a recommendation is very, very important. And I think, yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer that, because I think that it is completely child dependent. I think there's no kind of right or wrong answer. Some students come to us very early for homeschooling programs. Some just come for the exam years. It depends on what you're looking for.
Someone else is asking here about transfer certificates in case you decide to move your child at any point.
So a transfer certificate is essentially the school signing off that you have completed up to a certain year in your academic course. It's a requirement really only for the UAE. But it is a requirement if you choose to rejoin a school. It's not something that homeschoolers are currently able to provide. However, it is something that we could provide through our college in the UK, but it does require that blended learning program that we discussed earlier, where you spend some time at the college in the UK.
Right.
I think also just kind of chipping in with some personal experience. I've certainly worked with homeschoolers here over the years, and we have got them into mainstream schools again, even though they haven't had a transfer certificate. As long as they followed a recognised curriculum, they've achieved the kind of the goals that were set out in that. Schools are, you know, if they're keen to have the child, they will find a way of kind of making sure that that can work. So it's a sort of collaborative process with the schools and with the family and with the kind of homeschooling.
Great. I think that's everything question-wise. I believe that's everyone's questions answered.
Okay then. Well, thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you found the webinar interesting and informative, and addresses some of the concerns that you may have had over homeschooling. If you are interested in learning more about our homeschooling, do get in contact with us. We have a number of other webinars coming up as well. So if you're interested in our university kind of preparation webinars on masters, on UK versus US universities, and preparing to start universities, please do sign up to them on our website. And we're also running a series of step-up programs over the summer to bridge the gap between GCSEs and A-level or IB. And you'll find more information about that on our website too. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fiona, James, Claire, and Alex for joining us today. And thank you very much.